nation's largest resource for women in politics. We recruit and we train and we support pro-choice Democratic women up and down the ballot. But I'm going to try to take off of my partisan hat here and talk about the need for women to be better represented at every level of government in both parties, because we'll never reach parity if just one party is pulling their weight. So I'm hoping that we can have a really great conversation about moving forward. One of my favorite things about working at Emily's List is the way that we have approached structural problems throughout our organization's history. We've identified what seems to be the biggest obstacle in the way of having more women in office, and we've attacked that particular one. So historically, we started 28 years ago. In 1985, there wasn't a single Democratic woman elected to the Senate in her own right, not one. We had MTV before we had a Democratic senator elected in her own right. I just want that to sink in a little bit. We are talking about recent history. So 28 years ago, it was really hard for a woman to get taken seriously as a candidate. That meant no party support. That meant no consultants working for her. That meant no money. And as vicious circles work, without money, one can't be considered a viable candidate, and one can't be considered a viable candidate without money. So a number of women were brought together in our founder, Ellen Malcolm's basement. They all brought their Rolodexes. They all talked to their friends. They asked their friends to contribute to the cause of putting more women in office. And they figured out a solution, which was they wrote the checks themselves. Their very first success was just a year later with the election of Senator Barbara Mikulski, who has been one of the most prominent voices in turning around and making sure that women are following her right back up that ladder, which is exactly what we need. And we have a lot of really good women in office doing that now. So the second thing that we identified was that these women needed strong campaigns. Now, men have been networking since the dawn of time, probably, but at least since the dawn of the Republic. Women have really only had about 40 years, 50 years, 40, 30, somewhere in there, to talk to each other about how to get ahead professionally. What are best practices? What are best practices for women? What does that look like? We can talk a lot about mentorship programs, and I know that that's something that's being discussed in this report here, which is fabulous. But we needed, as Emily's List, to be able to tell the women who were considering a run for office what they needed to do first. How can we assess their particular race, because everyone is so different, figure out what advice we can give in terms of hiring a strong staff, building a plan. Men have been doing this for a really long time. There is actually a playbook, and we wanted to make sure that we could share it with the ladies too. I think the third piece, and this is actually representative of a lot of progress. I know we saw some sad statistics up there, but there are things to be optimistic about. Those initial problems that I identified in 1985, they don't exist anymore. Democratic women are seen as viable candidates. Party committees are happy to work with them. Consultants are happy to work with them. People are happy to donate the money, and at least on our side of the aisle, voters are really happy to turn out for them. So what's the problem now is that not enough women are running. So we have to talk about recruitment. I loved what Patricia said about women being less likely to identify themselves as qualified, because it allows me to talk about my favorite statistic, which is Jennifer Lawless from Rutgers does a really great job on this. But she asked a group of men and women to self-identify as unqualified to run for office. And among the men who self-identified as unqualified to run for office, more than half of them would still consider a run. Women's brains don't work that way. So the upside of that is that when we run, we're typically really qualified and we do a very good job. The downside of that is a lot of us don't ever take that first step. So what Emily's List did was develop the Political Opportunity Program, which goes into communities and recruits fabulous women who ought to have been asked 7 and 8 and 9 times already to run for office that simply haven't. I mean, we'll find people, women, who are partners at their law firm, they're on the PTA, they raised all the money for the expansion on the Children's Hospital wing, and they teach Sunday school. We say, have you considered running for office? And they say, why no, what a fabulous idea. If this were a man, everybody and his father would have been telling him to run. So Emily's List finds these fabulous members of these communities. We can particularly focus on communities of color, which is really important. And we then train them. And we're talking about training thousands, not 12. This is a big, burly operation because this is a big, burly job. The other thing that the Political Opportunity Program does is target open seats, which is specifically important that I know you guys are going to talk more about. Women are more likely to run for a seat when it is open and they're not challenging an incumbent. So what Emily's List does is take a really hard look at what seats are coming up, where are people term limited, where are we retired, because we want to make sure whenever there is an open seat, there are fabulous women who are stepping up to run. That's how you build the pipeline. We won't ever have more governors unless we have more speakers of legislatures, unless we have more mayors, unless we're building that pipeline moving all the way up. The final piece of the puzzle is women voters themselves. So Emily's List has a program called Women Vote, where we target women voters. We research them. We find out what they want, what they're doing, what is motivating them this year. We communicate with them, and we do our best to make sure that they make it to the polls. Because when women vote, women win. This is the truth. And in 2012, we saw a historic gender gap favoring Democrats. There were a lot of women showing up to the polls. They voted on behalf of women and families. So 2012 turned out to be a real mandate for women's leadership, because when they turned out to vote, they voted a lot of women into office. So I want to make sure that we're capitalizing on that enthusiasm around women leadership, that we're continuing this conversation, that we're talking about what it means all these executive seats are up in 2014, that we might even be hinting towards 2016 and the need for a first woman president. There is a lot out there in terms of people who want to see more women in office, and I'm thrilled that so many people are having that conversation. So thank you for letting me be a part of it today.
Thank you, Jess.